listeners. My name is Sara Madani. After high school, I took a gap year. One fine day, during my gap year, my sister told me that a K-pop concert was going to be held at her university. This was back in 2018. My sister was in her final year at Ajman University, and she told me to come along as this concert was open for everyone. I had never been to a concert before and definitely not to a K-pop one, so I decided to tag along to experience something new. The Korean boy band called Snooper was performing. I remember that the banner at the entrance to the concert hall listed the touring schedule of the boy group. The band was a part of the 2018 Traveling Korean Culture Initiative, and besides performing in Ajman, was also going to perform at the Korean Cultural Center in Abu Dhabi, the American University of Sharjah, and the Women's Campus of Higher College of Technology in Al Ain. It was truly quite an experience because now when I look back, all I remember is hearing a ton of girls screaming and seeing glow sticks rapidly moving in the darkness among infinite strobe lights. The screaming was so loud that I could barely hear the singing. You listen to the audio at the beginning, you know what I mean. I was confused because I assumed the girls were screaming because they understood the Korean lyrics. But how could that be? Now, fast forward 2 years. In 2020, the globe, tragically, witnessed lockdowns in major countries across the world due to the coronavirus pandemic. The lockdowns made people look for new hobbies. Some got into content creation for the video sharing app TikTok, some got into cooking, some focused on fitness, and perhaps most importantly, some searched for new and engaging shows on the media streaming giant Netflix. I came across my first Korean drama in September 2020, when I was recommended to watch Crash Landing on You, drumroll please, by my father. Yes, even I am just as surprised as you are that my father suggested me to watch a show. Wow, apparently he found Crash Landing on You to be very entertaining because the village life depicted in it was very comical. There was a scene in which the villagers use a refrigerator as a wardrobe for storing clothes and books. Since there is no consistent supply of electricity in the village, their logic dictated them to make good use of the expensive fridge. My father found this very funny. Crash Landing on You is still one of my favorite K-dramas, and since then I have watched a few including Descendants of the Sun, Pinocchio, Startup, etc. I found these shows so appealing because they're also eclectic. Ever since I began watching K-dramas, I suddenly started noticing the extent of Korean culture around me. Friends who loved the Korean dramas and music could read and write Korean. Crazy, right? Grocery stores sold halal Korean noodles. Every fan wanted to go to South Korea, and lots of universities had Korean clubs. This got me thinking, why was there suddenly such a love for everything Korean? On researching further, I came across this term called Hallyu, which literally translates to the Korean wave. Here's a detailed description about Hallyu for your understanding. In the past 3 decades, popular culture from South Korea rapidly spread across the globe and gained worldwide renown. This media culture includes Korean television dramas, which are called K-dramas, popular music, called K-pop, movies, and the fascination with the actors and singers related to these respective industries. Now, although Hallyu is a new media industry, it successfully managed to garner a devoted following across countries internationally. In order for you to understand the concept behind Hallyu and why its spread is so astonishing, let me tell you a bit more about South Korea. The Korean peninsula is home to 2 countries, North Korea and South Korea. Located in the lower half of the Korean peninsula, the Republic of South Korea mutually shares a heavily militarized border with North Korea. In the 20th century, South Korea underwent colonial rule by Japan, witnessed a bloody civil war, and faced extreme mass poverty. Today, the country is one of the world's most advanced economies, excelling in major industries such as electronics, beauty products, automobiles, and entertainment. In 2019, Hallyu-related exports from Korea worldwide amounted to a whopping $12 billion. Enthusiastic fans from Europe, the United States of America, Latin America, and the Middle East covet everything Korean. According to the Korea Foundation, as of September 2020, the number of Hallyu fans worldwide is a staggering 104 million. Interestingly, I found out that the United Arab Emirates and the Republic of Korea's friendship dates back to the 1970s and 80s. Content-wise, the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa region witnessed the strongest growth of Hallyu fans with the number rising to an astounding 1.2 million. One of the reasons behind the success of Netflix in the UAE are Korean dramas, not surprisingly, which continue to remain in the top 10 most viewed category. On Spotify, the UAE is the second biggest streamer of K-pop music in the MENA region. Now, as the UAE is my home, I decided to read more on how the Korean wave spread here. All of these factors played an important role in the birth of my podcast, K-Sarang. Fans, you know what the podcast name means. And so began the investigative and analytical journey about the rise of the Hallyu in the United Arab Emirates. I aimed to create a Netflix type series where all the episodes are released on the same day. So, listeners, I hope you enjoy this podcast and find it enlightening and get to learn a lot more about this topic. Now, to start off the series, I went back to the beginning where I first had a brush with Korean popular culture at Ajman University. Ajman University has Korean clubs for both its male and female students called Korean Vibes. The girls' side has 150 to 200 students, while the boys' side has 15 to 20 students. I spoke to Dr. Chuloh Jung, who is a professor at the university and the director of the King Sejong Institute in Ajman. The King Sejong Institute is a worldwide initiative of the South Korean government that allows free Korean language classes to students. Dr. Chuloh Jung kindly told me more about the Hallyu.
First of all, the root of this Hallyu starts from the 1997 or 98, when this exchange ratio, like foreign exchange ratio crisis. So Korean government cannot rely on heavy industries anymore. They want to develop like 60 industries. IT, space technologies, nanotechnology. One of them was a CT, the culture technology. So after that, Korean government spent lots of money on making movies and dramas and musics. And it was, the seed was planted at that time. And then in not only Middle East, it was spread to South Asia first. South Asia meaning some Malaysia or Thailand or Philippines, and then it came to here. Hallyu is, to me, is pretty much spread it to a female stay at home, and especially local girls. They're into Hallyu. That's what I know. Not only locals, but yeah, I think yes. Soap opera is even in Korea, soap opera is for a woman. But but those Hallyu is changing categories very fast. And then not only most of them is for like female-oriented drama, but still many other things. But it's not enough attract full Arab male students. K-pop is about mostly like cute male singers, 9 people, 10 people dancing exactly the same, and that's a very Korean thing. So that might be other reason. The K-pop is mostly from the male singer. Ajman University has it. Female side is like 100 to 200 people. Korean Vibes Club. Korean Vibes male side they have it, but it's like 15 to 20, so that's like 10% of I think eventually it will be spread it to a male side too, but all basically, especially K-drama is for woman. And if Hallyu has more more momentum in the movie side, I think they can observe a male audience too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess it's all boils down to like tastes and what they like, and because oftentimes boys are like that. If a girl follows it large, they don't follow it. Like even in Hollywood, if there's something that the girls like, it's oftentimes the guys won't like. And I can think of like
Yeah.
for example, Justin Bieber. Like they don't differentiate the icon from the art, right? So if the girls love Justin Bieber, all the guys would hate Justin Bieber. So yeah. I guess it
Right,
makes
right,
sense.
exactly.
Right.
Right, right. I agree.
And here, because like you said, very recently the UAE saw the spread of the Hallyu wave. Do you think, what do you think was the main contributing factor to that?
I think K-pop first. K-pop
K-pop?
spread it first. Yeah. And even Virgin's like what a Virgin Radio and many stations they playing K-pop without like any filtering. And Netflix
Right. With all the Korean dramas now coming up on Netflix.
directly, no need to bother to download anymore.
But then, for example, like I would say that Spotify and like Netflix are relatively still recent. I do know there are a
Right.
lot of people who started watching Korean dramas back in 2007, 8, 9, and listened to K-pop music then. Why do you think they were attracted to like Korean music or Korean shows back then?
You know, I think this is due to social media, especially BTS. They don't have enough money. They're
Right?
not from the major producer in Korea, so they spread their teasers and everything via YouTube. So that's how they become famous.
That makes sense. Yes. Here, because a lot of Emirati girls, they absolutely love Korean shows. So much so that they listen to more of Korean music than English music, or I guess Arabic music. Do you think there was this sort of not in the music? I mean, in the dramas. Do you think they saw sort of a cultural similarity that made them, that drew them towards Korean dramas?
Oh, I think so. Because all my Western friends they have a bit of a cultural problem here, but I don't have any problem here. Because this region now is like my father's generation in Korea. Korea is quite conservative countries, so culturally quite similar. It's a bit well like one generation before, something like that. That's how I feel.
Yeah. So you have been a resident of the UAE for how many years now?
11 or 12.
Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, in your experience here, like you would have noticed, or like you mentioned, the culture similarities, right? And beyond that, what do you think is like the uniting factor? Because I do know that the South Korean government and the UAE, go way back. They've been for the past 40 years. They've had like good diplomatic friendship, and and recently, like the Korean government took the initiative to ensure that more of the Korean culture was spread here in the UAE. So besides like what you mentioned about social media spreading Korean culture and culture proximity, beyond that, do you think there's any reason why people here, Emirati and expatriates, would gravitate towards Korean culture, and not just dramas and music, but also food and makeup products and like like items like phones like Samsung and cars like Kia or Hyundai? What do you think is the reason behind that?
I think Korea become like import export size. They're competing with Germany, but still comparatively, let's say still cheaper. The quality is pretty much the same and still cheaper. That's why people are attracted to Korean products. And Korean food is something new. But when you observe cultures from drama and movies, they try to do pretty much the same thing, like Korean street foods, and you see them a lot. Korean Chinese food, you see them a lot in drama. That's why people are trying here. They already know what it is, and so it was not available, but whenever it's available, they come and take it. That's what I know.
Right, right. That does make sense. And also like because you said there were similarities between the culture, like Emirati culture, the UAE culture, and Korean culture. More on that. Could you let me know, as a Korean yourself, what are the greatest similarities which you notice?
Um, Number one is patriarchy and family oriented. Not anymore, but especially when parents get old and son is taking care of their parents, and then whenever there's a holiday, everybody gather and sharing food together, like this kind of thing. It's quite so like I told everyone, Arab is much close to it. They may look like closer to European, though, but the way Arab thinks is extremely close to Asian. Asian for me, Asian means there's a two Asian, fancy Asian and jungle Asian. But fancy Asian, Far East, Korea, Japan, and China, very close. The way you would think is very close.
Right.
That's why there is no like not much barrier to observe these cultures.
I see. And the other Asia which you were mentioning, can I ask you which countries do you consider in that Asia?
To me, Asia is Korea, Japan, and China. That's Far East Asia.
Yeah.
And but the Westerners see the way they see Asia is way bigger. They even include India, but India, China it's like they're big enough. They don't need to be in other group. I think the one country itself is a universe. India and China.
Right, right. I agree with you. Quite big, huge places. And so like you said, like the patriarchy, familial traditions, I see they are the sort of unifying factor of these two cultures. And it's very interesting to note because scholars often say, like, countries which are so far apart, like the UAE and South Korea, which is so far apart, have a similar culture. Do you think this similarity in culture also comes because Asia, the continent Asia in general, has a more of a conservative culture following than like the Western cultures?
This conservative culture is for me it comes from the Confucianism. Confucianism is China, basically China, Korea mostly, and Japan, and southern Asia like Myanmar and Thailand. They're based on Buddhism. Or also Korea has Buddhism, but there's a family tradition and everything. They have all these mentalities from the Confucianism, and basically that philosophy is for feudalism a long time ago. When let's say you don't step on teacher shadows, and king and father and teachers are the same body. All these are conservative thoughts still there after Korean War, and people become Americanized, but deep inside DNA is still there. Conservative DNA is there.
Right, right. That's something interesting to note. Like because these values beyond Confucianism is also like visible in the Indian subcontinent, for example, because I am Indian, and we also have these values of respecting our teachers the same as we respect our parents. You know how in Korean culture, or so I have watched in the dramas, they never address someone who's older to them by their name, like they do in the Western culture, which which is surprising because like for example, I go to university and all of my lecturers are British, and they've told me to they tell us to address them by their first names. So when I come home and speak to my parents about my lecturers, they get so
We don't
offended.
do that.
Yeah, they're like, oh,
Exactly.
that's your teacher, how can you call them by their name?
Exactly.
So this is a very surprising thing to note, and I think it was one of my favorite aspects that of Korean dramas. They still hold on to cultural values. Um, and look at it as progressive rather than regressive. Beyond that, I wanted to further ask, there are like, because the Korean wave, like the Hallyu, has spread across the globe, and
Right.
it's like gained lots of momentum in the past couple of years. Where do you think it's gonna be in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Good question. I have no idea. Now they reach maximum. When I was a kid, I grew up with a Hong Kong movie. Now all Asian kids, they grew up with China, not Chinese movie anymore, Korean movies and Korean dramas and Korean songs. When I was a little boy, I grew up with Jackie Chan. Those things are now it's changing dramatically. So I think they'll find a way to systemize these things and
Right, right. So, what do you think that would mean for like the future generation? Like a whole generation that's grown up watching Korean dramas and movies, and not just Korean, young people, but like young people internationally.
Yeah, I think yeah, they will it basically they're influenced by Korean drama and Korean culture, but there will be evolution. Also, online game, Korean game is like spreading based on this culture stuff. And
Thank you so much for your time.
okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of K-Sarang. I'd really hope you enjoyed it. Join me for the episode coming up next, where I speak to researcher and K-drama enthusiast Donya Saberi.